What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of On the Block. Joe Ferrari here with the Igor Henriquez. Igor, why don't you tell us what you got on today?
Well, you know what? I'm feeling good. It's been a few weeks. I'm in the Halloween spirit. Figured, I'd show some love. I've been called a sheep, a witnesser, and now they gotta call me the 4-time champ. Feels good, I tell you. Feels good. I got my belt. I got my LeBron jersey on. It's feeling good. I'm enjoying my moment. Shout out to the special correspondent. This is especially for you.
Oh my god.
Feeling great, and enjoying the Halloween spirit.
Okay, so we had talked about when we did the show, especially when I was at, we talked about how the Clippers and the Lakers were the two teams that we thought had the best chance to win. Obviously, Milwaukee and Toronto. Breathing that.
Feeling good.
But you didn't have, the most faith in the Lakers. You wanted them to win, but you thought the Clippers were going to do it.
Yes.
And some report, actually, take it. I want to hear what you got to say. So you didn't have faith in the Lakers, but they.
Here's the thing. I always had faith in LeBron James, but I'm also trying to be as unbiased an analyst in terms of the NBA as I can possibly be. And simply, I'll be the first to admit that I thought that the Clippers had the better team. If you look at it on paper, the better team were the Clippers. Now, but here's the thing. The best team on paper doesn't always win. And then that's just realistically, and that's what sports is all about. You got the COVID situation, you have the bubble, the 5-month layoff, and then you gotta have the situation where you're like, how's the team gelling and so forth. So I'd be the first to tell you I didn't think that up 3-1 on the Nuggets that the Clippers would blow 3 games in a row. I don't think anybody really would have thought that. But team chemistry and the determination and the mental fortitude is a thing. So obviously the Clippers were a little overestimated on how they would perform in the playoffs based off the fact that that we saw some signs of dissension and perhaps preferential treatment that Paul George or Kawhi Leonard were receiving. There were reports of that. Everyone thought come the playoffs the talent will come together, but it ended up being that heads would roll. Doc Rivers is out. There's reports that Paul George might be traded in the offseason, and that they may just do it all over again with a different situation. Now, the problem that they have is, they traded away all that draft capital to acquire Paul George. George is obviously on a hefty contract. He's obviously gotten his reputation, especially that last game where he was shooting threes that hit the side of the backboard. And his reputation and his trade value is probably at his all-time lowest, and that's just the honest.
It's still an all-star. It's
still an all-star. But again, are you going to do the Clippers any favors by taking that contract and giving him back valuable assets?
Well, there's also an opt-out after next season, right?
That's exactly
There's 1 year left for both these guys.
Paul George is one of those things that I can see him possibly opting out. I think Kawhi's put too much into the marketing and wanting to stay at home that he'd likely play it out. But again, we see these things where sometimes these teams that come together in the first year, they always end up struggling and then they end up recovering. Now, they might lose Harold, they might, and so forth in free agency. So it depends how they run it back. There's reports that they want to bring in Rondo because they're missing a true point guard out there. Patrick Beverley, though he talks a lot, I think he averaged like 2 assists a game in the playoffs. That wasn't going to cut it. So they might retool now. Like I said, I always had faith in LeBron, but again, all in all, I thought that their biggest problem would be the Clippers. And then when they didn't have the Clippers, I think I was the first one. As soon as that game was over, I was sending that face because I knew it was over. Because that was the one team that I figured could beat them. I did think the Bucks would have an opportunity, but then they fell apart. Everything did go the Lakers' way, and that's just the honesty of it. So all in all, it was a great fourth championship. Who knows what'll happen next year when it starts, and then they're talking about January and so forth. But gotta enjoy it. Live in the Basque, and no one's gonna be coming for me for Christmas or anything. So that's another W in the win column. So. It is what it is. You got to enjoy.
We talked about that, both of us. The only team that the Lakers really had, maybe an issue against with matchups was the Clippers. And like you said, once that was done, there wasn't really much in their way. Like we saw Miami, we had chatted back and forth with Lamar and with the guys in the group. After game 1, we said this might be done quick, especially after those injuries to Bam and Goran. But they won a few games. Jimmy Butler obviously deserves a lot of props because we talked about on the show, and everybody did, between Jimmy Butler and Paul George forever. And Paul George always had the upper hand. And now I think what Jimmy Butler has shown that Paul George hasn't really shown is like superstardom in the playoffs.
Sure, I think that I think mental fortitude is an underrated ability that a lot of these guys. Again, Jimmy, I think by the last game, the last game was pretty much over at halftime. Jimmy was just worn out. Like he just couldn't do that at a sustained level because he was playing 40, 46, 47 minutes. He was basically carrying them a load of the offense. You had some night with a game 5, you had Duncan Robinson that went off, but those sustained efforts weren't really there. And yeah, I mean everything went the Lakers' way for game 6, where at halftime people. I don't think I can't remember the last time that someone declared it. Like the analysts at halftime were declaring the game over at halftime, declaring the Lakers the champ. Very rarely do you ever see that in an NBA situation.
Well, the score was insane.
It was like they were up like
40?
30, 35 or something, 30, 35 points. And truthfully, they weren't even shooting the ball that well from distance. They were just inside, just hammering in there. And, you could tell that they were, they heard a lot of the critics, especially off of that Danny Green miss, and then they didn't want to keep that one close. But overall, it was a weird season, right? Like some people say that, it's an asterisk behind the championship. I personally don't believe that, and the fact that sure you had 5 months off, but that bubble situation where you can't really leave and you can't really go anywhere for 3 months, it's a tough situation. I think that's actually harder than having the home court and traveling and so forth, because of the fact that you can't do anything else but to distract you. If you don't have like a good set of teammates that you can distract yourself with, or a good like mental capabilities, you're in trouble. And I think that's what we saw with the Clippers. That a lot of them didn't want to be there.
That's what I was going to answer.
That's the situation.
The reports came out that the Clippers didn't want to be there, and I think that for whatever it's worth, if this were a non-COVID situation, I don't think that the Clippers would have lost to Denver, especially blowing a 3-1 lead, given the travel and all that stuff. But whatever happened. I guess we're pretty much done with the finals.
Well, I mean,
do you think Miami comes back strong next year? How good do you think that they bounce back?
You know what? It'll be interesting because we're seeing a lot of moves, and I think when the offseason really hits in terms of free agency, there isn't like a high caliber of free, but I do see that there'll be there seems to be a lot of movement in Philly, a lot of movement in Brooklyn in terms of coaching. I think the Daryl Morey hiring for Philly will be interesting if he keeps Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid. I think that team still has a lot of capabilities, but they're a little handcuffed with some of those contracts. So I mean, I think it's a little early to say that Miami has a realistic chance of getting back, because again, it's one of those situations that I personally believe that had Toronto ended up beating Boston in that game 7, that they probably could have had a decent opportunity to beat Miami in that series. So I think it'll be different depending on the landscape. What happens with the Raptors and a couple of the other teams. Brooklyn, obviously, how's Durant and Irving gonna coexist? What's like D'Antoni looks like he's gonna be joining that staff. How's that gonna work out? So there's a lot of questions. I think Brooklyn probably has the higher end offensive capabilities, but we all know how Kyrie Irving and Durant can end up destroying team chemistry. So that might be a problem. We'll see. We'll see how Durant comes back.
Also injuries, like you said, like both those guys have had their share of injuries. Obviously, KD more recently with the Achilles, that was a bit of a freak thing, but Kyrie seems to be hurt almost every year, and that's another wild card too.
And his attitude.
You think that Philly? How do you think Philly comes back next?
It can't be worse than they were, right? Here's the situation: they're coming to a crossroads where they can't. Like, what are they going to do? That Tobias Harris contract is definitely limiting what they can do, because he just hasn't been a good fit there. Al Horford's long in the tooth, and he just isn't working in that system either. They might be able to ship that one off because it's a shorter term with less money, but they're really handcuffed on what they can do, because again, do you give up on Simmons? Do you give up on Embiid? Do you run it back again, knowing that you can't really do much with the team except throw in some role players? Like they're probably the most interesting case to follow, because I think everybody else, besides maybe Boston losing Gordon Hayward, which again, see how that turns out, and maybe Indiana moves away from Oladipo. Besides that one, Fred obviously with the Raptors, but I think that's a little bit of a lower scale depending on how much money he gets. Mm-hmm. There's a lot going on, a lot of balls in the air, but like I said, it's going to be an interesting offseason. Like what happens with Golden State, the draft.
And the Lakers have a lot of free agents as well, right? I think that most of their team is free agents.
KCP and Rondo will probably need to get paid.
Dwight Howard, obviously.
And I think the Lakers, Lakers have this, I think that they have LeBron, they have AD.
Los Angeles.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if you want to be a winner, I think it's been proven fact that joining them will do well. And I think KCP probably deserves, like Rondo, I think was on for like 2.5.
He got a minimum last year, right?
So he's probably deserved higher money. But again, it really depends on what the Lakers see in there. They're going to have the cap space because again, They got to pay AD, but they'll have enough cap space to bring some of those guys back. So I mean, personally, I don't know. Like, I mean, is Dwight replaceable? I think Dwight's replaceable. I think he
Yeah, but
showed
if he's
that.
going to come back on a minimum again, why not bring him back?
Why not? And then I mean, KCP's up and down. I think Rondo is probably the one that they really do have to keep because I think his influence in the playoffs was pretty big considering he took the ball out of LeBron's hands.
Give him some rest.
Give him some rest, and it was just another ball handler that
and a creator for the team.
He was hitting some threes. He played well. It looked like it was Rajon Rondo from like 5-6 years ago. So they'll probably try to bring him going to the Clippers would be kind of weird, but
if he's going to get the money and he wants to win another ring, why not? Yeah. He owes them really nothing, right?
Yeah, I mean it would be a little bit of a weird situation for sure, considering the fact. But who knows? I think that the Clippers are probably missing. That was probably maybe their one missing ingredient where.
A pure point guard.
A pure point guard, which I guess.
Set the table.
I mean, Kawhi had that last year with Kyle and with Fred and so forth, and I think they are missing that because I think Patrick Beverley's a solid like bench player,
yeah,
but he's not a starter. He's not a starting point guard. And again, and then Lou Williams also isn't the guy that's going to create a lot of assists.
And sacrifice or
lemon pepper Lou. And we all know we all know where exactly his head was at when they got into the bubble. So
and that I think speaks for the Clippers team, really, right? And a lot of those guys, probably what we talked about, didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
But I want Jimmy Butler and also LeBron. You talked about Rondo and giving a ball handler and giving you such a break, and I think that what the Lakers did as the finals went on is they really pressured Jimmy because once Dragic went on, he was their only creator and ball handler, right? And I think that's what wore him down. It wasn't even necessarily the 45 minutes because if you're only really playing on offense and picking your spots to guard LeBron, I don't think it's that big of a deal. When they picked him up like half court or full court some of the times, right?
Yeah.
And that's exhausting.
And I mean, to Jimmy's credit, at the end of the day,
hell of a performance.
Hell of a performance for sure. And again, the great Game 6 one was a little limited, but I mean, realistically, they started putting AD on him for a lot of the plays. And as good as Jimmy is, that's AD's got a huge height advantage. He's a great defensive player. You always knew that was going to be big problems. You could tell even during the games when Jimmy saw that it was going to be AD guarding him, Jimmy would really uncomfortable, and he'd ask for someone to come in and do a little pick and roll situation because he knew that 1-on-1 he with the length and with the height it was going to be a problem for him. So I mean I give him credit. Do I really think that a Jimmy Butler led team is ever going to win the finals based on him leading the team? I would probably, as the lead dog, probably not. It's just too much of a star-driven league. And though I think Jimmy's an all-star level player, I don't see, unless he's got a magnificently great supporting cast. I see him maybe as a 1B, but I don't know if I see him as the main guy to win the win.
Okay, so let me ask you this then: do you ever see Boston win a championship with their core?
You see, I think Boston has a different situation because I think Tatum can reach another level.
You think so?
Yeah, I think Tatum can be a guy that can reach another level where he's young and you can tell that he's developing. And I think we still see a higher level from Tatum where he can become a dominant player. So that's the one difference I see with the Celtics. Again, it really depends on what's going on with I think coaching wise they're pretty good and I think they need a little more depth, but it really does depend on where Tatum goes. It really depends on where you see where Tatum's peak is at. I think he's still got another level, maybe 2 to go. And he showed some glimpses. He was against the Raptors. He was magnificent.
Yeah, he didn't miss much. And when he went against Miami too, it was the same thing. Yeah. We had that question on the show: who would you rather have right now? Obviously Tatum's younger, but who would you have right now? I think that Jimmy was the answer that we gave both of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think right now I would say based off of what I saw, I would probably say that Jimmy is ahead, but because of the age gap, I think Tatum still has ways to go. And again, it'll be his team in Boston. And again, he could be he could be in one of those situations where guys like Don, let's call a spade a spade. As much as everyone's on the Giannis train, he's been a pretty big failure in the playoffs. I mean, we got to call
his inability to shoot.
His inability to shoot when stuff gets tougher, when defenses take him make him an outside shooter, hasn't performed. So
we've seen AD do that too, and I don't want to stand up for Giannis because he won MVP and everything. And that was another conversation. There was the Jimmy Paul George, there's also the Giannis and Anthony Davis. And now we saw Giannis won Defensive Player of the Year. We know what he is, and Anthony Davis showed that he might win it next year.
Yeah, and I think the interesting factor is that and I think Giannis is gonna have to come to grips with this if he decides to stay in Milwaukee. Who's gonna be the 1B? That's his biggest, because as much as Chris Middleton's been a great story, I don't know. I don't think Chris Middleton's the type of guy that's going to be a co-star and able to lead you that much. Not just honestly.
No, and I don't disagree with that. So let's
Just
flip this.
honestly.
If LeBron James, instead of getting Anthony Davis, gets Giannis, and we flip this around, let's just say next year for whatever that happens, you're
Okay.
flipping AD and Giannis. Is that team better or worse? Do they win a championship next year? Very similar players, obviously.
I would say based on the fact that Giannis struggles because I mean AD is a very good shooter. Even I think that's a tough question because I think that's a tough one. I think it would be a worse team in a sense that I think AD and Giannis have similar defensive capabilities, but because AD is a much better shooter, I think with LeBron's style of game where he likes to break down, I think the Lakers would actually be worse with Giannis.
Could they still win a championship? The way
Could they
NBA
still
is
win a
right now?
championship? I mean, when you got two Bulls like that, I
Two
mean,
MVPs.
two MVP title, of course you can still win a championship, but their playing style would be different, and how teams play them. I think like when you got like LeBron and Giannis bullying your way to the
But you just get a bunch of shooters in, right? Now you have an
Yeah,
offseason to
and
reconstruct your
obviously,
team, maybe,
I
right?
mean, you have that, and you have to you hope that those guys. I mean, I don't think Danny Green had the best of playoffs. In
That's
all honesty.
almost 2 years in a row, though.
Yeah,
right?
in all honesty, and there's again you get shooters, but like they relied on guys that, and then especially I don't think anyone thought Caruso
I was
was
gonna
gonna,
say
was
Caruso
gonna do
picked it up,
that,
yeah.
and Rondo's hitting threes. They didn't. I won't say they had the best. I think they were.
KCP hits
They
those
were
shots.
like 20 in the low 20s in 3-point percentage. So the shooters on the team more, and you had Morris put. I said every time I saw Morris shooting them, half the time they would be air balls or wouldn't even be anywhere close.
Yeah.
So you need better shooters. I think with that current thing, I think AD was actually one of the I don't like you give Giannis that shot
Game winner.
that game winner. I don't think
No, he doesn't
he
get it.
Giannis hits that. And I think that's why people had to be. You had to come out on AD to protect that because AD can hit those shots. I think with Giannis, you give him those shots. So I think the defensive systems would be different. But it all depends on the capabilities of the other.
Secondary cast.
You need better shooters for sure. I think at least. But again, like bullying your way to the Giannis to LeBron, LeBron to Giannis. I think that would be crazy. But it could be possibly be beaten depending on what you get in terms of the shooting. If you just pack the post. And again, Giannis's free throw shooting isn't great. LeBron's free throw shooting isn't great.
Yeah.
So there's ways around it.
One last thing that I just thought of before we take a break. After the break, we'll come back and talk Raptors. Let's just say it in this crazy, like, Paul George gets traded for Giannis. So you got Kawhi and Giannis there going up against AD and LeBron.
That would definitely
And maybe somewhat realistic, right? If
Sure.
the Bucks know that Giannis is not re-signing, let's get some value for him, and you throw in some pieces that the Clippers obviously have, maybe Lou Williams
and I would say that the Clippers have better shooters than the Lakers. Shaman and so forth. So that could possibly work. Now I don't know how Milwaukee would feel about that, and I personally think that Milwaukee's gonna play it out. I think they believe.
Possibly.
I mean, I think they believe they'll resign him. They believe that Giannis is a loyal guy. I think it really depends on how they do next year. I don't.
We say this every year about Milwaukee, right? Like, how are they going to do this year? Where the championship is going to go? And
the problem with them is that they're as more as this goes, there's more problems coming in because you look at it, the league gets better, and you look at it now. Everyone believes that this Brooklyn team's going to be solid, so that gives you another hurdle. A Boston team that's basically giving you again. I mean, they beat them last year pretty handily, but that's getting better.
A year better, yeah.
Yeah, and then you have the Miami, who's probably going to get better.
Yeah.
I mean, you have another year out of
76ers.
And Tyler Hero's going to be better. Robinson, they're going to bring that core back. They're not going to be losing much. So I mean, here's the thing: Giannis did get injured, but the Heat were still dominating them throughout that series. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be problematic. I mean, the Bucks want to spend money, but they're also in situations where their contracts are.
Middleton got one of the richest deals in league history too, right?
No one's taking on that Bledsoe money. Like I don't know who you unless you didn't make it like again the Lopez. I think Lopez has actually been a pretty good player for them, and they have these other guys, but I don't know how much better they're going to get in these offseason. I know they want to spend, but I don't know who they're going to. I mean, they're already.
We know they're going to win 60 games probably in the regular season.
Sure, but that doesn't. We all know that doesn't really matter, right?
Exactly.
Then especially when and the bubble kind of shows you had Milwaukee had home court, they probably would have been more successful. Exactly. Without that home court, they weren't much of anything for the most part. They beat the first round. They beat a team they should have beaten pretty easy, and they lost the game. And then the second round, they were just disasters. So yeah, it was rough. It was a rough go, and then I think Coach Bud is on the hot seat. He's another guy.
Whenever you win the Coach of the Year, it seems like except Nick Nurse, but it seems like all the guys that won, like there's nowhere to go but down from there. Because
Oh, of
usually,
course.
right, you finish first or
Professional.
whatever it is, and you don't repeat. Where's there to go? And with Milwaukee, like we said, how do they improve? They're not going to get a top draft pick. Like they pretty much stuck.
I
with
think
what they
I
had.
think their biggest problem, and I think we've discussed this before, is that they chose wrong in terms of who they kept in terms of Bledsoe and Malcolm Brogdon. I think they missed Brogdon quite
His
a
shooting,
bit.
his defense.
And Bledsoe just hasn't been the same really in the last couple of years, and that money is going to be pretty huge. So
And we saw that even against the Raptors when Kawhi was
you
here.
might
last
have to
year,
trade bad contract for bad contract and hope a change of scenery might do something. I don't know. It'll be an interesting situation. And again, it all depends on like even the Raptors. We don't know what's going to happen with the Raptors. Who's coming back? Who's not? Well, they're definitely, if they lose all those free agents, they're definitely going to be a worse team. That's just
We're gonna have right there. We're gonna take a quick break, come back, and talk about the Raptors are gonna look like next season with Fred moving into free agency. See you guys in a second. We're back on. Welcome back, guys. Second half of the On the Block podcast. Day before Halloween. Fitting that you have the mask for the GOAT of the current league. But let's talk Toronto Raptors. So the Toronto Raptors have some free agents. Fred VanVleet, Serge Ibaka, Marc Gasol, the notable ones. Out of those three, I guess we know that Marc's the most unrealistic of coming back.
Yeah.
Probably wants to go back home to Spain. And we've talked about, but whatever. We wouldn't have won a championship. Toronto wouldn't have won a championship without him here. So kudos to Marc, probably a Hall of Famer.
yeah.
Between Serge now, if you lose Serge, I feel like you really have some depth issues in the front court because we don't have too much there. Fred as well.
No faith in Slim Duck.
Are you gonna start him? Are you gonna start?
No, I wouldn't
Shout
start
out
him.
to our guy.
I wouldn't start him, but at the end of the day, he might have earned some. In limited situation, if you can put on
He's a
some,
rotation guy.
yeah, if you can put on some bulk and like with his athleticism, he might be a player.
He's gonna be a rotation guy.
Yeah.
Just if you're gonna start him, if the Toronto Raptors are gonna start him, your team has to be incredible. I don't know if that's gonna be the case, right? But let's get back to Fred.
Shout out to Montreal.
Shout out to Montreal and Haiti. But so Fred's a free agent, and obviously the Knicks chatter's been out there. You don't think that he's going to take that additional money to go to
Here's
Europe
the
because the
thing.
Knicks are a train wreck.
The Knicks have been a train wreck, and a lot of guys take the money, and with the whole pandemic thing, I understand guys wanting to get paid. It all really depends on what Fred's priorities are, and that's a simple scenario. If his priorities are to win, he likely resigns on a friendly-esque deal with the Raptors. If he's chasing money, he might probably ends up going to a team that's been struggling for ages, like the Knicks, where he gets paid and is secure for his family, but whatever, 20, 30 million. I mean, you can live decently off of that money either way. I personally, again, I've never met Fred, never talked to Fred, but he seems like the type of guy that is a reasonably loyal individual, and he has to take into effect that the Raptors gave him an opportunity to get paid. He was an undrafted free agent. Raptors gave him a shot. They cultivated him, allowed him to play, and now
Learned a lot from Kyle.
Learned a lot from Kyle, and he knows what his role on the team is going to be and what the team is going to be. Now, obviously, the Raptors are in a transition phase. It was put off for a couple of years because of the whole Kawhi thing. Then last year they ran the majority of it back because they were the defending champions, and they were hoped for some, and they played better than most people. A lot of people thought they would, based on the fact that I think that the whole championship run helped a lot of guys. You saw some elevation from Pascal Siakam, not so much in the playoffs. And guys played at different levels. Fred got higher up. OG played. They're still talking of OG becoming even a bigger. I don't call OG a star, but his defensive roles are solid. His offensive game is getting there. Some people predict that he's going to be an all-star. We'll see how that goes with his offensive game. They have the pieces there, and I mean, if Fred wants to actually win or compete, he likely stays with the Raptors. There's not a lot of teams that. I think a lot of teams are waiting to spend their money next year with the great crop coming up. So then the teams that are really going to be in there are teams that are probably thinking that they're not going to get any of those guys, so they're going to splurge, like the Knicks.
Sacramento teams like that.
Yeah, and where are those teams going to be? The Knicks. I mean, we were just discussing it off camera. Barrett wasn't great last year.
You don't really see any. I mean, I do like Mitchell Robinson at center. I think he's got some
Foul
capabilities.
problems, but some
Yeah,
promise.
some capabilities as a solid defender.
Knox, we're not sure what he
There,
is
you
either.
know, Knox. There, you know,
Nilkina.
there's talk for like, you know, Dennis Smith Jr. Is he gonna recover from what's been going on with him? So there's a whole lot of holes. It seems to be a rotational coach every year.
They have the Clippers first round pick for whatever that's worth for Marcus Morris. I don't know how that deal. We looked at it at the time. We're like, oh, the Clippers were trying to get Morris from the Lakers. They gave up another first round pick to get him. I just remember, like, that's crazy.
I mean, like, and that's the thing. And we were talking about the Clippers. Like, their lack of draft capital will end up hurting them significantly.
Yeah.
But again, the Clippers.
Back to the round.
The Clippers, this year's draft to me, like another thing that we were discussing off air. I don't know who, like the high end talent. We know about Ball, we know about Wiseman and Edwards. I don't know what those capabilities will be. I'm not. Again, I've seen enough of Ball. I don't like it. I don't like the family. I've been very adamant that I don't like the family. I think the dad's a loudmouth and he should really keep his mouth shut because his predictions have been atrocious. And all he's done with his other son is basically destroy him because he's comparing him to Stephen, the Curry. And here's the thing. Ball had a pretty good year last year comparably to what he was in the Lakers. Mm-hmm. So he might be he's still going to be a serviceable piece, mm-hmm. but he's not going to be He's not going to be Steph Curry. He's not going to be anything of the sort. And what now we have the young kid who's supposedly better than even than his brother, yeah. And we're already hearing that he's doing terrible during interviews. And he's supposed to be one of the top 2 picks. So I don't know how good this draft class is going to be. We didn't see them much during March, and we've had limited exposure. So I mean, a pick in the late 20s, who the heck knows? Yeah. You never know because
it's a deep draft, and there's no stars. There's not very many stars. Maybe a few guys at the beginning.
And truthfully, you just never know. I mean, I actually one of my buddies was tweeted about the 1999 draft when the Raptors took Alexander Radojevic, who at 12th overall played like 15 games. It was awful. Now there was a guy in the second round, you probably know him, a guy named Manu Ginobili who ended up being pretty good. So you just never know, and I think it's one of those type of drafts where like you might be able to snag a guy that ends up being solid and that is really under the radar in the 20s. And for example, the Raptors drafting usually has been pretty good in the 20s. Exactly. Pascal and so forth. So they might find like a diamond in the rough. But I don't know, in terms of that kind of stuff. That pick that late for the Knicks, and considering the fact that they've been terrible drafting,
that might be better for them because there's no pressure. Oh, we need to take this guy. Maybe take the best available guy at 25, whatever. Can't be worse than what they've done so far.
That's for sure.
I want to finish up though with Fred. So, do you think that Fred ends up staying, or do you think that he chases money? Because we know the Raptors are going to have a competitive offer. It might be $2 or $3 million lower than the average.
I think Fred will stay because he's built the base. Just like I stated, they gave him an opportunity. If he decides to leave, I'll be slightly surprised. If he chases the money, it is what it is. It's business. But like I think he knows that he might not have gotten these opportunities in other situations and opportunities to grow. And there's a winning mentality here. So if he chased money over that, then all the best to him. And if he comes back, I'm at the game, I'll give him a little clap, and then I'll probably boo him the rest of the game. And it is what it is. That's business.
But the thing too is point guard is probably the deepest position in the NBA. So I don't think there's as many suitors as there would be for another position.
And
too,
as you mentioned, like Fred got a little found out in the playoffs. What is Fred? Is Fred a starting caliber point guard that can lead you to something? I personally don't know because he does become very hot and cold. And it's, again, just like we mentioned with Pascal, it was the Raptors' pecking order last year when they won the championship was great.
Perfect.
You had the big dog in Kawhi, and then you had these other 2 or 3, 4 guys that are basically able to be supporting cast. When Kawhi left, a lot more defensive pressure came on Pascal in the playoffs, on Fred, on Kyle. And, I'll give Kyle credit. Like I said, I'll never be the number 1 Kyle Lowry supporter.
He had a better playoff than he did.
He had a better playoffs. Kyle was one of those things with consistency. One game he goes off for 30, the next game he goes off for 12. It was one of those situations. But I mean, Kyle, I think stepped up. There were times that I thought for and a little bit was on Nick Nurse. I'll be honest. Like there was some plays not calling timeout, and then Freddie's throwing up 60-foot shots.
Yeah, half-court shot.
Half-court shot, and then at the end of I think the last game where should have called timeout, and then Fred ended up airballing the shot. There was issues there. There was some questionable stuff from Fred there. So he's a streaky player too. So I mean, I give him the 4 years, $20 million. I give him that. If he starts getting into the 25 million a year, I'd be a little bit. I'm not gonna give him 100 mil. I definitely won't give him 100 million because again, you want to be competitive, but you also got to be smart with your money. You also want to be ready for next year, where the Raptors, Kyle's gonna be gone. Serge might take a 1 year deal. Who knows? They'll have money available to chase some pretty significant free agents. And there's been talk. Giannis likes Golden State, likes Miami, likes the Raptors. It all depends on the situation. Would I rather wait and throw that money at Giannis potentially? Yeah, because it'll make us competitive. Is Giannis the missing piece for another Raptors championship?
Possibly.
Possibly, but he's gonna have to keep improving with his shooting.
We have shooting here. That's the thing.
And again, like what's gonna happen with Kyle? You're not gonna. To me, you can't pay Kyle top dollar when the man's 35 years old.
No, I don't think Kyle's next contract is going to be, like I said, in terms of the overload of point guards in the league. Kyle's probably not going to start for very many teams in 2 years from now, right? Like when he's 36, probably at that point, I assume he's about 34 now.
Yeah.
As a 36-year-old point guard, you're probably going to be a backup, have 1 or 2 seasons. Like that's a position you need to be.
Yeah.
That's not like a big man.
And the situation is there, like the Raptors set themselves up nicely with that next year, where depending on how the team's going, he could be a legitimate trade piece that you can grab assets for if you believe that you're not going to be competing for a championship. Because again, I think based on the fact that they'll still have a majority of the core back, depending on the situation. If by some odd reason you do lose Fred, you do lose Serge, you're probably not in the championship conversation. Let's be honest. So Kyle will then be next year used as draft capital, where you can trade Kyle to a contender for some draft picks and start rebuilding the team. Because at the end of the day, if you lose Fred, you lose Serge, and we haven't talked about Mr. Davis, Lord. I don't know what the hell he was thinking. That's another problem.
We might all of a sudden.
Not
this season, but the year after, for sure, have a point guard issue, right?
Yeah. And again, there's no center depth with Mark gone and then Serge is gone. And then you're starting, Slim Duck at center at this point. And you're might lose Rondé. Rondé didn't get much playing time in that Boston series. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But the Raptors are going to have a lot of questions going forward.
Yeah. Between Serge and Fred, who do you think is more likely to come back?
Probably Serge.
Really?
Because I think Serge has been a little bit more vocal about enjoying what he's been here, and he knows that because he won a chip here. He's comfortable, like he enjoys being in Toronto. Yeah. I think Serge is probably, because he's more of a veteran. He's already won the ring. He's been around a little bit. He's gotten his paydays, and I think him and Toronto with the whole Mafuzi Chef thing. He just seems like he's more built at home and more built in, that he probably, they were talking about the Rockets and this and that.
Yeah, so the Rockets 2 or 3 year deal.
But let's be honest, the Rockets window probably to win a championship is lowering as again the Warriors are going to be much better next year. I don't even see the Rockets being top 4 or top 5 and even in the West, more or less the championship conversation. So when you got the Lakers, you got the Clippers. You got the Warriors. The Nuggets are going to be much better. Like maybe they're at 5.
Yeah, it would be one of Dallas.
Again, Dallas. More and more he's gone. The whole they get new style of coaching. Now are you going to go back to playing with bigs? Center. You got no centers right now. They're in too much flux to really be there. So I don't know. It'll really be depending on the situation. But yeah, I think Serge. It looks like he's more ingrained, and he's been more vocal about wanting to stay. Fred's been a little bit standoffish.
Fred doesn't say much anyways. That's the thing, right? So the Raptors have, let's say it's like the 26th pick in the draft this year. I don't know. I guess I'll say my thing first, then you can go. But you got to see, I guess, what's available at that point. We said that the Raptors have drafted very well, especially towards the end of the draft. But I think if Serge or Fred leaves, you address that position instantly.